is peace, Islam is ease, Islam is not danger or disease. Islam is love and prosperity, Islam is not hatred or adversity. Islam is neither maze nor grace, Islam is giving Allah praise. Islam is keeping up the pace, Islam is for every race.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah. Welcome to this episode of the Beauties of Islam. I'm your host, Yusuf Estes, and I want to continue talking about something very special in Islam. That's how we understand the books of Allah. We've talked about that before in our programs, but I want to be specific now in making a comparison between the various books that have been revealed by Almighty Allah to the human beings. One of the most famous of all on the earth, of course, is the Bible. The Bible is the Old Testament is comprised of some of the books that were revealed long before Jesus. Then the New Testament is comprised of a series of books that were put together after the time of Jesus. Between both of these together, we have what's called the Holy Bible in the English language today, translated at the time of King James. There are many different versions, however. In fact, there are different even numbers of books. For instance, in the original Catholic Bible, ever since the time of the Nicaea Council in 325, there have been 73 books within that one collection. The Orthodox has 78 books, and now the more modern version, which comes with the Protestants, has 66 books. Now, together, all of these really pretty much say the same things. They're not coming out with new gods or really anything other than the subject of history, giving some information about the Jewish tribes, talking about how human beings naturally are and how they should be, and pretty much giving the message that there's one God, you should worship Him. There is some reference in the New Testament to the nature of Jesus, which is not found in the previous revelations, but that's something that's interpreted different ways by different Christian groups. Now, the final and the last revelation that comes to human beings, according to Islam, is one of the main beauties of Islam itself, and it's called the recitation. Or, in English, this, we say Quran, the recitation, but in fact, you can find a lot more about the Quran by listening to it than you can just sitting and looking at the pages. You see, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, never learned how to read or write. He was not an orator in the sense that he was getting it from what he picked up, but rather by what he heard. And when the angel Jibril or Gabriel came to him, he ordered him, Iqra, recite. And he said to the angel, La ana bikari, I'm not a reciter. And then the angel again told him, recite, Iqra, Bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, khalaqal insana min alaq. Recite in the name of your Lord that created a human being from an alaq. We've spoken about that in our other programs to some extent, but it really goes on because the Quran also describes all the various stages and the trimesters inside of the mother as the child progresses through these different stages, in shape and out of shape, from the very time of conception up until the time the child is born. All of this is discussed in details in the Quran, and it's one of the beauties of Islam is the miracles we find about the creation of human beings in the Quran itself. All that notwithstanding, though, what I'd like to talk about today is how the Quran comes and how it's preserved. Because the Prophet Muhammad, as I've already told you, couldn't read, nor could he write. So how is it that he was then able to understand and communicate this message to his companions, and how were they then able to pass it on to the successive generations? And that's one of the miracles of the Quran, and certainly one of the beauties of Islam. A person who recites the Quran is called a reciter or a qari. And when they recite it, they're doing what's called Quran. And they usually begin like this. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, which means I seek refuge with Allah from the condemned devil. And then they'll say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, which means in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. And then they'll begin to recite. For instance, they might recite, Wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salahati wa tawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr. Now, this is a whole chapter of the Quran. And this is how they used to understand Quran. When they went to a class or to a group and sat together, they would have someone who would recite out loud, just as I did just now. Then they would listen, and they would repeat what they heard. And then they would take it back to their families, their tribes, and others, and share it with them, and let them hear it as well. The important thing was to get it exactly as they heard it. Not a single letter different, not a word different, not a sentence difference. It had to be exactly the same. And then, after they had heard it, memorized it, and shared it, then is the time to start to talk about what is the meaning behind it. Because the meaning of the Quran is very deep. There's not a single sentence, there's no structure within the Quran other than that it is something exactly from Allah, the creator of the universe, and certainly He's the one to give meaning to it. Now, we're not going to talk about the meanings so much today as we are going to talk about how the Quran is preserved. And they heard it and they recited it. Heard it and recited it. And passed it on generation after generation in the same way. To the extent that today we have more than 10 million human beings walking around, living on this planet, who have memorized this entire work. All of the words in the Quran, every single word, in the exact same order, regardless of whether they know the Arabic language or not, whether they live in an Arabic country or not, it's still in the Arabic language. If you go to Indonesia as an example, you find the most amount of Muslims in Indonesia. They don't speak Arabic, yet at the same time they know the Quran in the Arabic language. If you went to Turkey, it's another country that they don't really speak Arabic language, yet they memorize the Quran in the Arabic language. And the same is true of all of the Muslims around the world, regardless of the countries where they live or their language. Wherever they are, they have it in the Arabic language. And I was surprised when I went to Canada. I found people reciting it in the Arabic language. I was surprised when I went to Mexico. I found people there. They know the Spanish language bit, yet when it comes to the Quran, they're reciting it in Arabic. So I asked myself, how is this possible that this book could be memorized by so many people around the world in different languages, yet they don't even know the Arabic other than the Quran? What I want to do now is let you reflect on what I just said, and then when we come back, I'll give you what turns out to be not only just the answer to this, but the answer to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Quran has to be, must be, the last and final revelation from Almighty God to the human beings. So stay right where you are. We're going to be right back.
Islam is keeping up the pace. Islam is for every race.
Europe's forgotten heritage.
This is a sad reminder of the past history of the Muslims in the city. Nowadays, there are no Muslims anymore. These are the mosques that have remained. And it is really sad. Wait a second, this is Morocco. No, this is Tunisia, Algeria, North Africa, Egypt. No, this is all Europe, and this is all part of Spain. Islam spread first in Africa, and then from Africa, it came over to Europe, and then it did developing work in Europe. Now, we look the other way around nowadays. The compass was invented by the Muslims. Many important inventions came from the time of the Muslims on the Iberian Peninsula. Instead of people becoming less in battles, as we normally know, as we know in battles, obviously people die, but no, what was happening? The Spaniards recognized and realized the superiority of the Muslims and the treatment that the Muslims gave to the Christians and the Jews in Spain at that time, that they happily accepted Islam, many of them. And not over the fountain, as we've seen it before in other places in Greece. Now, it has some Arabic on top, as well as it had some Arabic down, where the tap used to be, or where the water was coming out.
Pack your bags, grab your passports, and join Dr. Steph Curris as he takes us through Europe and rediscovers Europe's forgotten heritage, only on Hoda TV.
Islam is keeping up the pace. Islam is for every race.
We're back. You're watching the Beauties of Islam. And right about now, you're probably asking yourself, what is this man telling us? Is he insinuating that the Quran is something better than the Bible? Is he saying that the Quran replaces the Bible? What's he trying to get across? And he's claiming that there's some kind of proof. You're going to prove that the Quran is really from God, and you're going to prove that it's the last revelation to human beings. So how? One of the things that you hear, and I remember when I was still a Christian talking about the Bible, that we could look to the Bible itself and read what it says, and from the Bible we would understand that it is from God. But they would say, well, that's circular logic. You're only going to the same reference. You're not going outside of the reference of the content. So if you have a book that said this book is from so-and-so, and what's your proof? Because the book says so. Well, that's why they call it circular logic, because it just goes in a circle. But when we talk about the Quran, we're not just talking about pages. We're not talking about paper and ink. When you talk about paper and ink, what you're really talking about now is kitab, because that's what the word in Arabic is for book. But Quran is what's being recited. So the fact that we have, as I already mentioned to you, more than 10 million people today reciting it exactly, word for word, all the way through from beginning to end in the Arabic language with no differences. What does that mean? I'm not done. There's another point. We also have 1.5 billion, that's B as in baseball, 1.5 billion people today who are memorizing and reciting at least portions of it. And again, it's all exactly the same. Every brand new Muslim, when they enter Islam, and every single child as they're growing up in Islam, begins by saying, Bismillah. Bismillah, in the name of Allah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. There's no occasion when a child would sit down, maybe to eat or do something, except they would say Bismillah. And the new Muslims being taught the same thing. You go into a door, Bismillah. You sit down, Bismillah. You get up, Bismillah. You do what you do in the name of Allah, and that's the first words in the Quran. Before you start reading, writing, or doing anything, Bismillah. Bismillah. And that's how this book starts. You're going to say, well, now wait, that's still not a proof. I wasn't using that as a proof. I'm just telling you a fact. The real proof comes into this. I'm going to ask you about something called telephone. Did you ever hear of a game called telephone? Now, the way it works, you take 10 children or 10 people in a room, and you take one aside and you tell them a story, a short story, a few paragraphs. Then you ask them to go tell somebody else privately. Then that person will tell somebody else privately. And then that person tells somebody else, again, privately, until it comes to the last person. Now, at that stage of the game, I'm going to ask you a question. What will that be like when they get to the end? Will it be the same or no? And you're going to tell me, it won't even be close. So this is the point, and listen closely. Today, you have 1.5 billion people who are reciting the same thing, 10 million of which have memorized the whole thing, and there's not a single difference anywhere in it. And these people are from different countries, different languages, different tribes, different political and social makeup. And yet, it's the same as it has always been since the time it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the first place. Right about now you're thinking, wait a minute, let me get a copy of this. Let me find out about it. So I'm going to tell you what to do. Go to our website, beautiesofislam.com, and we're going to give you one free. We'll even get a translation for you so you can read it in your language. Do that. And until next time, for Beauties of Islam, this is Yusuf Estes saying peace. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Islam is peace, Islam is ease, Islam is not danger or disease. Islam is love and prosperity, Islam is not hatred or adversity. Islam is neither maze nor grace, Islam is giving Allah all praise. Islam is keeping up the pace, Islam is for every race. Islam is peace, Islam is ease, Islam is not danger or disease. Islam is love and prosperity, Islam is not hatred or adversity. Islam is neither maze nor grace, Islam is giving